Pokemon, and that makes all of the difference coming in here as we have the next round showcased. It's Marco Silva, in fact, versus Baris Akcos Chromie, and two players I'm very much looking forward to seeing on the desk again.
Yeah, these two players have both been on stream yesterday versus different people, but here they are again. So Marco Silva, there he is once again on your left. Utrecht Special Event Top 4, Bochum Regional Top 8, Jönköping Regional Champion and OCIC Champion in 2020. A huge moment for him. And on the right, Baris Akcos with Danish Open Champion, the OCIC Top 8, World's Top 8 as well, and the South African Nationalist finalist. So a little bit of a veteran on the right there.
I remember that year quite well, David, and Baris was definitely a player that wanted to maximise the chances of getting to the World Championships, which he did in 2016 and did very well at that. A player that hasn't got as much time to compete as once he did back a few years ago, but does still like to show the kids how it's done once or twice.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, who says you can't be a veteran and still kind of be playing, Ben? Exactly.
Absolutely, yes. Just one moment, let me grab my Switch. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, Marco, as we were saying, not having the best start to day two, but certainly wants to change that, and the tools that he has at his disposal will be that Fluttermane King Gambit, GU Iron Bundle, Great Tusk and Talonflame.
Yes, a very fast offensive team there, maybe bar the King Gambit, but otherwise very quick. So we've seen Marco use this team quite effectively, especially in that day one going undefeated, often leading with that Talonflame to either set up the Sun to boost up Photosynthesis on a couple of Pokemon, set up Tailwind to make things a lot faster, or send up those Will-O-Wisps to lower the physical damage of a lot of the big physical attackers in this game.
Marco was saying, along with his brother Pietro, when we got to chat to him before this tournament, that he really does favour that fast offensive play style and has honed his skills very effectively to be able to pilot those with great effect. Baris, on the other hand, a player that likes these more consistent strategies, but using something slightly different to the usual consistent bulky Pokemon that he has favoured in past years, and instead going with a little bit of Jumpluff action.
Yeah, so this is, I think, the team that Joseph Ugarte used to win Portland Regionals. I think I don't think there's any differences actually. Kind of looking at it. So we've got that Specs Fluttermane, and obviously that Jumpluff is such a key pawn kind of in this set, where you might be considering, say, an Amoonguss there, but it obviously is quite different. You can go throw out those sleep powders before anything attacks instead of after. You kind of got an Encore as if you're like an Iron Bundle, for instance, and you've got Tailwind as if you're a Talonflame or a Murkrow. So it's kind of a lot of Pokemon all in one there, and with so much speed behind it once it's in the sun.
And with that Covert Cloak not going to be affected by any sort of fake out in the sun. In the meantime, get your votes in now. Which player are you supporting? Which player do you think is going to be winning? Which player maybe do you think that you want to be going to the next stage into that top 8?
Yes, for sure, because this is a very important match for both these players. One more loss and they are out of contention for top 8. And the other one will still have the chance to get in. So both these players are probably thinking very hard about how they're going to play this. Now, do you think it is going to be the Sun Jumpluff team that's going to win, or do you think it's going to be Marco's also kind of sunny but fast offensive team that's going to win? Marco obviously looking a little bit more popular at the moment, but as we've seen throughout today and yesterday, sometimes the poll is not quite correct.
Absolutely not. I mean, the size of the Italian community is definitely a factor in these poll decisions. We'll have to see, as you say, David, whether or not that's right. One thing that I'm really looking forward to seeing in this particular matchup is Baris is bringing the sun, but Marco has some Pokemon that benefit from the sun with that Photosynthesis ability, the Great Tusk, as well as the Fluttermane on Marco's side of the field. Will quite enjoy the extra boons that the Photosynthesis ability gives if Baris decides to use his own sun with that Torkoal.
something we've seen a lot of on stream is when everyone's using a Great Tusk, it's usually Choice Scarf, almost entirely from what we've seen. But on Marco's team, it's that Life Orb, which is really interesting. So a lot of calculations of damage will be very different for Marco's Great Tusk as soon as he positions it correctly. For instance, in the Great Tusk Mirror, which we do have one of here, normally a Great Tusk can take a Headlong Rush and another one before it gets KO'd.
Right.
But in this instance, Marco's going to be able to 2-hit KO Barish's Great Tusk, but Barish can't 2-hit KO back onto Marco's Great Tusk.
And of course, if Barish goes for the Headlong Rush or the close combat before Marco's able to get a Headlong Rush back, that Life Orb compounded with the defense and special defense drops that Headlong Rush and close combat give to Barish's Great Tusk could be enough to even pick up a one-hit knockout.
That's a really good point. It really depends on the positioning and how these players have got around it. And Marco having Protect on his Great Tusk allows him to be a little bit more positional with his Great Tusk rather than Barish's one, which is just faster, yes, but then you can't do much to it once you've clicked in your move.
And of course, the difference in training will be very interesting as well with that Sun on the field, whether both of them are going to be boosting up their attack or if one of them is going to be boosting up their speed. Most likely Marco is going to be boosting up the attack because of that Life Orb. You'd kind of think that Marco's trained the Great Tusk on his side to be a little bit more offensively trained. Still speedy enough to take up the KOs before his opponent gets a chance to move, but definitely wanting to take advantage of that Life Orb.
And in terms of this matchup, I feel like we're probably going to see this jump off a lot. Right. I mean, yes, it can get faster in the Sun, and maybe Barish wants to be a bit more careful about how much he boosts Marco's team, but Marco has the ability to set that up too. So I feel like Sun is going to be inevitable in this matchup, but I think this jump off is going to be really key because, especially because this Great Tusk isn't Choice Scarf, even Jump Off without the Sun can outspeed it and really threaten it with a Leaf Storm or a Sleep Powder, which otherwise hits Barish's team very hard.
I mean, the question really that we have, if that jump bluff is indeed in play, is how Barish decides to use it, whether going for a little bit more of a consistent Leaf Storm strategy, whether or not Barish decides to get up the tailwind against Marco's quite offensively driven team. Usually offensively driven teams are less likely to be able to take those big attacks coming out, and so the tailwind becomes yet stronger form, a very strong form of speed control against Marco here. But also, if Barish decides to hit that Sleep Powder button, is it going to connect?
That is a great question, yes. We're so used to having Amoonguss and just going 100% accurate Spore, but occasionally, yes, Sleep Powder is the necessary move to click. And that isn't just the only move that Barish has on his team either. On his Torkoal, which is a little bit unusual too, as you may have seen from Joseph Ugate's team as well in Portland, it has Fissure. So I know we've not been seeing a lot of Ting Lu with Fissure anymore, but Torkoal is taking up the baton and is going to make sure that something just falls into the ground.
Torkoal just wanting to, take some of the limelight away from Ting Lu here and say, like, hey, I could do that too. Look at me. And we actually saw Barish opt for that in a pretty rough matchup against Eric Rios in day one. Clicked the Fissure button 3 times, unfortunately wasn't able to connect. We were rooting for it back behind the desk, I must admit. But the great thing about that Torkoal is the options that it gives to Barish's team. Barish doesn't have too many protects, so he really needs a way to position his Pokemon, and that Overheat in combination with the Eject Pack that the Torkoal is running gives him a lot of opportunity to lead it out. If there's an Intimidate that comes out from his opponent, the Eject Pact activates and the Torkoal gets on out of there and Barish can reposition. If not, you go for the Overheat, the Eject Pact activates on the special attack drop from that move, and again, something else can come on in there.
That's so right. It's a really nice positioning tool that is just not really seen at all in any other team at the moment in this game. Now, we also have a King Gambit mirror, which is really interesting. Now, not the fastest option, but maybe that kind of slower, bulkier option too. Both of that are Assault Vest, but on Marco's end, he's chosen to go for the Terra Flying. On Barish's end, it's the Terra Fire. Now, I think the Terra Flying is looking pretty strong for Marco going into Barish's team, because it obviously can't get hit by the opposing Great Tusk for much damage at all, and a Rock Slide isn't too powerful either, it's just such a bulky Pokemon. In addition to that, you can also avoid the Fissures, which is also nice. And critically, Barish's Chien Pao, which often uses Sacred Sword, It doesn't have that at all there. So this King Gambit isn't too threatened to Terra into the flying if it's face down into it, because there is no Sacred Sword coverage.
Certainly, and whether or not that Terra flying, Terra Blast will be a crucial factor to Marco's game plan yet remains to be seen. If either of them do, in fact, go for that option, we'll have to see how that plays out as we get into game one with these two players, Marco Silva on the left, Baris Akcos Chromie on the right.
Okay, yes, round one, and we've got that jump off right on your screens today for another game. But looking at the two leads here, there's obviously a lot of speed control on Marco's end. You've got the Icy Wind and the Tailwind options, which is a really nice lead to give you lots of options to be able to position what you need to position for what is in the back. So we can see Marco clicking in that Tailwind, which is going to enable him to outspeed the jump off even in the sun with his own Iron Bundle.
And it's a Terra leading the way for that jump pluff, going for its Terra Water here, making it a little bit less weak to at least the Talonflame that could go for a Gale Wings Brave Bird and remove it from the field. Instead, though, Talonflame is going to be clicking that Tailwind, making sure that the Iron Bundle on Marco's side of the field is able to get off that Freeze Dry first. Doesn't matter that it's a water type, Freeze Dry will hit super effective, but not enough to pick up the KO. And the answer to the question that we posed earlier, it is not going to connect, but Overheat, not perfectly accurate, will connect, and it's a one-hit knockout onto that Iron Bundle. That's going back to Marco, and a little bit of an adjustment going on here as the eject pack activates, and the Torkoal is going back to Baris.
So one Pokemon down on each player at the moment, but Baris has to send in his Pokemon first, and then Marco can respond to it because of the way the eject pack works at the moment. So Marco is kind of up on the decision making at this point, and especially with a Tailwind coming up, it's meant that something is going to come in very nicely and threaten a lot of damage. Namely, I'm thinking maybe a Great Tusk could be very nice to come in here, because now the Jumpluff has completely lost its flying type. But as we see, there is no Great Tusk at the moment, so Fluttermane's coming in instead here, and with the sun up, it's going to get its Protosynthesis activated on both ends. That's the speed for Marco here.
Everything is very speedy on Marco's side of the field right now, and certainly Fluttermane on Marco's side will be putting a lot of pressure on Baris's Fluttermane as well. That Gale Wings, because the Gale Wings ability from the Talonflame, because it didn't take any damage this turn, is still going to be in effect. So even if Baris did get the Tailwind up here, because there's no damage on the Talonflame, it would still be able to knock out that Jumpluff before it has a chance to move. And that's something I think Marco will be thinking very strongly about. Do I want to flip a coin on that Sleep Powder any more turns in a row?
Exactly. I mean, chances are, when you click it, it's going to hit. But over the course of day one and day two, it is going to miss at some point, and it is today that has happened. Brave Bird, though, into the Fluttermane, doing a huge chunk of damage thanks to that sharp beak boosting it up on this Talonflame. And it's the Fluttermane on Marco's that is outspeeding thanks to that Tailwind. Dazzling Gleam picking up a double knockout.
Absolutely there. Yeah, really nice way to use all of that speed control to your advantage. And I think the Fluttermane on Marco's side of the field may have needed to use that booster, Protosynthesis boost into its speed to be able to outspeed the Jumpluff in the sun. With Jumpluff's chlorophyll ability and its natural speediness, it does depend on how these two Pokemon are trained, but could have been a very helpful factor. Baris bringing in the last two Pokemon that he has available to him in that Great Tusk and the Torkoal.
Yep, it's looking rough for Baris at the moment now. Barrett Marco has just all the speed and, all the offense at the moment. So, yeah, it's a fair forfeit there for Baris to kind of rethink now for Game 2.
Absolutely, and Marco not showing any emotion there, just focusing up because there is two more games at most to play yet, but one more will keep Marco into contention for the top 8 of the Malmö Regional Championships. Baris obviously thinking as well quite hard about how he can adjust. I think looking back at game 1, it really was that Sleep Powder that was the crucial deciding factor. These two teams are so offensively driven that those sort of hits and misses can make such a vast difference in how a match unfolds.
And the question is, does Baris go for the same tactic? Because if, say, you go for it and Sleep Powder hits, which it probably will do, does that still play into the same game plan that Baris had kind of thought was going to happen? Did Marco bring the same Pokemon that he kind of thought he was going to bring too? Because we obviously saw great Tusk in the back for Baris there. And into a Flutter Mane is not a great answer, but maybe with a Photosynthesis boost to its attack and a Headlong Rush, it might be enough to pick up a one-hit knockout on a Flutter Mane. However, looking at the rest of his team though, for instance, a Flutter Mane in the back for himself, or even the Chien-Pao, are really strong options that also will just naturally outspeed likely the Flutter Mane too. So he could still switch things up a little bit, but still maybe lead with the same thing. And I think if you're Baris, that's probably what you want to do. It just maintains that kind of that veil of obscurity and unknown that Marcus has to kind of think about playing around.
Absolutely. You know, it was nice to know for Baris that overheat was enough to knock out the Iron Bundle. That may change Baris's thought process going into Game 2. Certainly, if the Tailwind was the move of choice rather than the Sleep Powder, it's a little bit more consistent, but it also matches the speed control on Marco's side of the field. And I think that was the big problem that Baris had, is that Marco's team just was going first, and you know, if you had that if Baris was able to set up that Tailwind earlier in Game 2, may have had a little bit of a better time. As it stands though, it's that Jumpluff as the lead for Baris with that great Tusk and Iron Bundle, and Talonflame coming out from Marco, the same lead as Game 1.
So I like this switch up from Baris because he really threatens the Terror on his own Great Tusk here, because it's obviously weak to Iron Bundle's attacks at the moment, but if it Terrors into the Fire type, which it does have, it's suddenly going to resist any of those Ice moves. Hydro Pump is obviously a little bit safer, but then do you go for that when a Torkoal switch in is just inevitable at any point? So we're going to see how these players have just decided to do that, whether Marco is going to take the risk as he Terrors into the Ice type on his Iron Bundle. So I think we might be seeing him freeze dry.
I think we might be indeed. Ice type Terror boosting the power of that Flutter Mane's attacks, and we saw that the Jumpluff didn't really survive with too much health left in Game 1, so maybe that's just putting it over the edge, as you correctly predict, David, that the Terra Fire is going to be the choice for Baris. Another Tailwind coming out from that Talonflame there, raising the speed of the Iron Bundle and the Talonflame, and it's going to be that Freeze Dry coming out onto the Jumpluff. Is it going to be enough to take up the knockout? It certainly is, now that Baris has not gone for his Terra type, and there's that Ice type Terra from Marco's side of the field, but Ice Terra is not helping with its Rock Slide as Talonflame goes down in one, and actually Iron Bundle takes a lot of damage.
Yeah, it really does. You can see that's a 2-hit KO on Marco's end, which is very useful for Baris, especially if we go into a Game 3 here. However, Marco critically has the speed advantage here. And with these two fairly offensive teams, that's a really big one. So actually, I really like the switch up that Baris has gotten into now. The King Gambit here is something that's really bulky. And even into physical, or even super effective hits, it might be able to take a lot of attacks. However, Baris has, in a way, kind of jumped the gun, as it were, with his Terror on his Fire, because it didn't actually do anything that round, and now he's already kind of played his hand. Suddenly, Marco can really play around at this time and quite safely target a Hydro Pump into that slot. We'll
have to see if that's what Marco decides to do with that Iron Bundle, as the Great Tusk, feeling quite threatened, does switch out into Flutter Mane. Hydro Pump following up is going to meet its mark onto that Flutter Mane, doing over 50% damage, and a Headlong Rush is going to go into that King Gambit. It's a one-hit knockout. That Life Orb showing why it's the item of choice on Marco's side of the field. That knockout will be crucial, as we have still Tailwind on the field, and gives Marco a lot of room to maneuver.
Yeah, exactly. Great point, Ben. I think the Life Orb has really made the difference for that KO there, which otherwise wouldn't have. It would have been good to see maybe a Sucker Punch come out from that King Gambit or something to kind of pick off that Iron Bundle before the Hydro Pump came out, but it does unfortunately go down without doing anything this turn.
Absolutely, and now the Great Tusk coming in for Baris. We know the items on both of these Pokemon. The Flutter Mane is the Choice Specs variant, and the Great Tusk is the Choice Scarf variant, so no protects, no way to mitigate any damage. And of course, with the Fire Terror on that Great Tusk, it's going to be at risk of another Headlong Rush coming in from Marco's Great Tusk.
So it's the Earthquake from Marco's Great Tusk, which is a very nice option. You've got the double Headlong Rush and the Earthquake kind of option there, which is really good. And with the Fire Terror, that Great Tusk of Baris then takes a super effective amount of damage. But Fluttermane does go down because this Great Tusk is still in a Tailwind, still really fast, and still hitting so hard.
Absolutely, and the Earthquake will be landing back onto Marco's Great Tusk from the Great Tusk on Baris' side of the field. But even with those defense drops, isn't nearly enough to pick up the knockout on Marco's Great Tusk, and it will be a freeze dry follow-up from that Iron Bundle, as well as another attack if it's needed onto that Great Tusk. It's not. The Great Tusk goes down, and Marco Silva will be winning round 14 of the Malmö Regional Championships against Baris Akcos.
What a win for Marco there. He's probably really wanted that since he came into day 2 at the moment, after having gone undefeated in day 1 and got nothing but losses to start with. He's finally got that win now, and that could still potentially keep him in contention for the top 8, depending on how the final round, next round, goes.
I've got to say, David, that was probably one of the fastest games I've seen this weekend so far. 2 very offensive teams facing off against each other, and it is always the battle of who offenses each other the best.
It really is, exactly. And like, it always seems to be that Great Tusk mirror that we see in these offensive mirrors. I think we've seen it in previous rounds as well, especially yesterday, where it was a Great Tusk on one side, Great Tusk on another side, and depending on the training of it, can really determine the matchup. And even when we had a Choice Scarf mirror, it was still right. But one was still probably going to be faster than the other one. Yeah. And how does that make a difference? And when you mentioned about the headlong rush and the defense drops, it really makes it so complex that I can't even think about it right now.
Absolutely. No, you know, it's quite an interesting little dynamic here. The ground-type Pokemon of choice. We had a little bit of Regulation B, I think it was, where Great Tusk was very, very popular coming out of Orlando Regional Championships, I believe, where it really picked up a lot of steam. And then players decided to opt for a little bit more of a consistent way to use that ground type coverage, and we saw the rise of Pokemon like Garchomp instead of Great Tusk, that unlike Great Tusk is able to take a couple of hits now and then, but Great Tusk back with a vengeance.
Yeah, it really is, and it shows particularly, especially from that graphic that we had earlier of the kind of the day 2 usage stats. Great Tusk is right up there as one of the Pokemon that you really want to be preparing for when building these teams.
And I think the other thing that would be remiss if we didn't call out would be the speed control options for both of these players. Baris using the Sun to gain the speed control with that jump bluff, but that was put under pressure by the bird of choice on Marco's side of the field, and you know, really showcasing why, again, Talonflame and the Murkrows that we've seen a little bit on stream from day 1, yes, absolutely, are, you know, really strong options to be using in the Regulation C format. Talonflame against Jump Bluff both threatens the Tailwind of its own with Prankster, so with Gale Wings, so it does have increased priority, but also using that Gale Wings to threaten a knockout in 1 if that Jump Bluff didn't go for the Terror. So I think it was quite an uphill battle of how you get started in the game for Billa in this particular matchup against Marco.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we didn't see any sort of sleep powder that could kind of come out from in that game too, which I think Baris really needed to kind of slow things down a little bit. That would have put a real stop to the Talonflame especially, because in a lot of Talonflame situations in other teams, it's usually the safety goggles there, but with the sharp beak, it can really take on, it can't take those sleep powders at all. And so it would have been like a really key point if he'd kind of gone for that kind of same play in that game. However, Marco did kind of account for that, as we saw in that game too, where he went for the freeze dry after going for the Terra Ice. So even if the Jump Off had gone for the Terra Water, it still probably would have got KO'd. So to be fair, he kind of not committing the Terra right there was the play. Just unfortunately, the Great Tusk wasn't be able to pop off as it wanted to do. Yeah,
and certainly, you know, no skin off Marco. You know, I personally don't know my Jump Bluff calculations. I don't think you would expect Marco to necessarily know them as well as you know the calculations on Arcanine, for example, that we play over and over again in preparation for these events. So, you know, I really like the way that Baris played Game 1, going for the Terror, probably knowing that the Iron Bundle wasn't going to knock it out in one with a freeze dry, and therefore trying to use it to his advantage didn't quite work out as Baris intended. But game 2, Marco saw the way that the damage played out and adjusted exactly the way that he needed to.
Yeah, he did. And even if it was the same lead, it's such a strong lead, this Iron Bundle Talonflame, because it doesn't get much faster than that. Iron Bundle is so quick, bar like Dragapult and Electrode, I think, in this mess game. I don't think there's much faster than that right now. So having like the 3rd fastest Pokemon in the format on your team, and then having a booster energy on top of that to boost its speed, which this one has, and having Talonflame, which is the fastest Tailwind setter in the game as well, it really puts you in such a really nice, comfortable position just from the get-go.
It does, and you know, there's always that conversation about how do you get yourself on the front foot in VGC. That's definitely one of the ways to do it. If you're going first, there's more opportunities for you to have options that you didn't have otherwise. You can hit your opponent first, and you don't have to wait for them to, you know, attack you before replying back. Instead, you can be on the front foot in those positions, but also, you know, more hits first means more opportunities for flinches, critical hits, and, you know, all of these other side effects. And, you know, while we don't strategize for these things directly, it can just help you out along the way.
It really can. And you might as well have speed control on your side in any sort of situation, because it really can make one Pokemon that could have just got KO'd one turn, suddenly you're threatening the KO on the other side, which we saw so much here. And that's why the game was just so quick. All these such powerful Pokemon just positioned exactly where they needed to be. And Marco just had the superior speed control option versus Baris.
Certainly the option that Marco has on his side of the field that I was slightly surprised not to see was that Chi Yu. We saw that it came in the back in game 1, but didn't really have a chance to shine there in the sunlight for Marco in the way that the game played out. Yeah, I thought I'd give it a little go there. You know, but it boosted by the sun. I think that's another thing that was in favor of Marco going into this particular matchup. Everything on Marco's side of the field loves being in sun, and Baris had to bring the sun because you need to get that jump bluff faster than your opponent Pokemon, possibly faster than the Iron Bundle with a booster energy in the sun.
Yes.
But then with the Tailwind up from Talonflame, isn't able to necessarily go first. So all of those factors need to be in play for Baris, but that does put Baris a little bit on the back foot.
Nothing to say against the team, though, that Baris was using, because I think it just depends on how you want to play it. I think if we saw maybe a slightly slower paced game, maybe say like a lead of the King Gambit there, because this Talonflame doesn't have any fire moves to offer much of a threat. And it's so bulky, it can take all of the Iron Bundle hits. So if you lead that there, you can kind of, even if Tailwind kind of goes up, you doesn't really matter. You're already going to be slower anyway. You can just stall it out a little bit. You threaten Iron Heads left, right, and center. You threaten your Kowtow Cleaves as well, or Assurances, and the Terra Blast Fire type as well can be really good into what Marco might have in the back.
Certainly in the sun, and you know, you don't even have to try to take knockouts in those positions. If Marco opted for the Tailwind against a King Gambit and so let's say a Torkoal for argument's sake, you know, if the Tailwind sets up, it's just time that Marco isn't utilizing that Tailwind, and when you get a little bit of damage off onto the field, it does make a big difference. The other thing that makes a difference in that situation is if it ends up with the Talonflame taking a little bit of damage and breaking that Gale Wings ability, then the Jump Bluff would be the fastest thing on the field and would be able to act before the Talonflame is able to set up a Tailwind later on.
I think that's a really good point, actually. There is definitely so many different ways that you could play this. So in the face of speed control, rather than just trying to match it from the get-go, just kind of whittle down, use the bulk of your team that Baris' team does have in that Torkoal on that King Gambit to kind of stall things out a little bit more, and then to be able to get yourself into a position where suddenly your own speed control option is a lot safer.
Right, and you know, speaking about the way that Baris did play the game and the difficulties that come along with playing the more aggressive style into these Pokemon is looking at that Great Tusk in turn 1 of game 2. That was a really crucial turn because it went straight for the Terra Fire, but actually it was an Ice move that came out from the Iron Bundle on Marco's side. into the jump bluff. And so looking at how that decision panned out, if there was a freeze dry into the Great Tusk, it would have been a fantastic move. The jump bluff would have been able to do something, the Great Tusk wouldn't have taken as much damage, and the rock slide would have gone after the jump bluff, may have been able to do something else. With the way that it played out, actually it was better to Terra the jump bluff, or at least attempt to, rather than the Great Tusk, because the Terra Fire turned out to be the Achilles heel of Baris in the later stages of that game.
Yeah, as we saw, it took that super effective damage from the Earthquake in the end. But yeah, it seems to be Marco's spin on this speed control option, on this hyper-offensive team, has really kind of made him so successful. And I believe, I think as well, having a chance to win the other day, is that his brother's running a very similar team. And I think he finished runner-up, actually, in the juniors division.
Okay. I mean, Pietro's been taking the season by storm, just winning everything, basically. As I believe he said, he's been going crazy in this season and previously, but getting to runner-up in the junior division, a fantastic accolade, of course, and certainly locking up some more points for that travel award to the World Championships in Yokohama, Japan.
Yeah, I'm not looking forward to in 10 years' time where Pietro is in the Masters division and where I may be having to face him at that point, so that'll be a little bit scary. Maybe I'll try and avoid that and kind of continue to be maybe behind the camera.
Won't take quite 10 years, maybe, and certainly we can bring the Old Man Ben moniker to fruition there. Great Grandpa Ben could be where we're at that point.
Give yourself some credit, Ben. You're doing a fantastic job. And to be honest, at that point as well, where we've seen so many people kind of graduate from juniors and seniors, we're just happy that and proud, that we've seen these people grow up and become such the confident and powerful players that we know they're going to be.
And the question is when is Pietro going to be outshining his bigger brother, Marco? A subject of contention between these two brothers. Marco, of course, very proud of his brother and proud of all of the achievements that he's been able to create. But I bet that Pietro has a sneaking suspicion that he could rise to the top and outshine his brother in VGC in many years to come.
I think so as well, and I love that kind of sibling rivalry that we have sometimes. We've got a couple of siblings in the UK community as well. They often battle it out on our locals too, and we've obviously at the Buenos Aires special event that we had this weekend that just concluded, one of the brothers of a pairing won and the other came third. So, and they kind of seem to just battle it out constantly as to who's you're going to take the turns to be the winner.
I definitely wouldn't be the brother that came third there, because I don't think I would ever be able to live that down, or at least my brother in that position wouldn't be able to live that down.
Yes.
We have the few thoughts, I'm sure, from Marco on those things and how the game played out. Marco is ready on the couch and with Zoe Liu. So, Zoe, take it away.
Hello, Pokemon trainers. We are here with Marco, the winner of our last round. So, Marco, that was a very dominant game and very quick. So, what were your thoughts during the team preview?
Yeah, so I already matched this team, actually not in this tournament, but in another tournament held by Victory Road, the online one. And I lost to it, actually, in top 16. I lost against Joe, that then won the whole tournament. So after the match, I was like, okay, probably there was something else I could have done. And I kind of come up with this plan of just leading Iron Bundle straight away, because I was going for either Chiyu and Talonflame or Great Tusk and Talonflame. So yeah, I just realized that was probably the play. So yeah, just go with Bundle in the early game. Try to get a kill on jump bluff, either with the Terra or even without Terra. Probably with the Terra is better. Also, another thing is that I didn't really have the Terra before this tournament. I just added for this tournament.
All right.
The Ice Terras. And I didn't know that was going to kill the jump bluff.
Yeah, that's really cool. And also, your team is relatively standard, except for the sunny day on Talonflame. What were the decisions behind that?
Yeah, so Talonflame is really good only in some specific matchups. For example, against the Mirror of Tailwind. Or against Dondozo, so in those matchups is really great. And then I realized the Sunny Day helps a lot against the Surf Dondozo that kind of has been going around after UIC, because he made H2. He also won the last round on stream, so it kind of got popular. And he's also really good into some type of balance in which they don't really have they match Pokemon like
Right.
they resist ground type moves.
Yeah, that turned out to be a really good decision. And so now that you're in really good standing for getting to top 8 for the rest of this tournament, how are you feeling for the rest of the day?
Yeah, so like today hasn't really been going that well. So this was actually my first win.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just hope to like try to win as many games as possible.
Okay, that's excellent. So one last question. Do you have any shout outs that you want to give?
Oh yeah, definitely shout out to my mom and to all my friends that always be supporting me.